Welcome to our next lecture on Rambam or Nevuchim. We are in Book 2, um, Chapter 30, in the middle, and in the Pines edition, we are on page 353, the chapter in the middle that starts with the words, among the things you ought to know. The Rambam is going to be pointing out a long list of things. Actually, it may be a good idea. I'm going to go grab one myself to have a Chumash Bereshis ahead in front of you. Just because he's going to talk a lot about Bereshis. That's what the topic of this chapter is. And there's a lot of things he's not going to really give us answers. Like, he's not going to give us explanations. He's just going to point out weird things, that you should think about. But you'll see what I mean in a minute. But so he starts off and he gives us some ideas as to how he approaches the Bereshis and the problem of how to I'm looking for the right word, how to allow the coexistence of both Aristotelian physics and what's written in Genesis. And we went through that in detail before. And by the way, a lot of the scholars look at this chapter as somewhat of a if I'm allowed to say this, Mechilas Kvodo, a failure on the part of the Rambam, because it doesn't really go that beautifully. On the other hand, the truth is, if we look at it the way we've been understanding it, is the Rambam is giving us a suggestion with the understanding that should this science be proven wrong, you can figure out something else. He's suggesting what it might mean, as opposed to telling you what it actually does mean. And I think that's a much better interpretation, and you'll see why today. I'll show you a few places where you can kind of see in the Rambam that he doesn't really feel like he's telling us how exactly to understand it, but he's telling us a way to understand it. As long as you realize and recognize the primary idea, which is that the words are not meant to be a literal explanation of exactly how the world was created. As long as you get that, then the rest of it, is just an attempt. So among the things you ought to know and have your attention aroused to is the reason why it is not said regarding the work of the second day that it was good. So if you look on the second day, it doesn't say Vayar Elohim ki tov, like it says on other parshios of the other days. It says, and God did this, this, and this, and this, and God saw that it was good, right? But on Monday, the second day, it doesn't say anything. It says God made this rakia that divided between the upper waters and the lower waters, but it doesn't say it was good. So Rambam is going to make a very interesting suggestion, and as to why it says that. Now, you already know what the sages have said about this according to the method of non-literal interpretation, right? Right? They have already discussed this in their drash, right? In the medrash, where it discusses interpretations of the verses which don't 100% correspond with the exact meaning of the verses. The best statement of this kind, according to Rambam, is they have made about this is they're saying that why did God not say that it was good, right? So one of the Midrashim says because the work of the water had not yet been terminated, because there was still work left yet to do with the water. So to my mind, also, the reason in the question is very clear. That's what they said. Whatever that means, you could think about it. But Rambam say, I have my idea as to why God didn't say it was good when he was referring to the second day. For whenever it mentions a thing among those that exist, having been produced in time and subsisting in durable, perpetual, and permanent fashion, it says with reference to it that it was good, right? So whenever God creates something in time, which according to the phrase means that it didn't exist, and then God made it exist. Yesh me'ayin, when a new thing came into existence, and now it exists in the way it's supposed to be, the way it was meant to be, God calls that good. But there's something hidden, as you will see, with regard to the firmament and the thing above it. Remember, Rambam has emphasized many times that the world beneath the sphere of the moon, we see, we understand, we got all the physics down, we figured it all out. Above that sphere, up in the heavens, we have no idea what's there, right? We don't understand it. Now, remember, we already discussed the fact that in Rambam's day, that was the truth. They didn't understand it. And Rambam pointed out all of the difficulties with astronomy that made no sense to the scientists in Rambam's day. Nowadays, we've made more sense of it. But in those days, everything above the firmament, it didn't make any sense, right? So so what's above it is kind of hidden. So there's something different about what's going on up there in the heavens between that and what's going on down here. For if the matter is considered according, this is a very, very, very important sentence, because this has a lot of guidance for us today as well. And this following, for if the matter is considered according to its external meaning, if you look at the verse and you read it according to its simple meaning, that God made a firmament and separated between the waters up there and the water down here, and with the recourse only to superficial speculation. In other words, you think superficially, in other words, you think that it's actually referring to water that's up there and actually referring to water that's down here. In other words, if you interpret the verse of Bereshis literally, then it does not exist at all. Then you're going to be stuck with that problem. What do you mean? There is no water up there, right? It's not true. In other words, Rambam is saying, if you take the verse literally, you come up with a scientific problem, because it's simply not true. And this is the same thing as a scientific problem that you or I might come up with. If we read a verse literally, and then it contradicts something which we scientifically know is not true. And Rambam is saying, if you're going to take that verse literally, then you come up with a problem. It does not exist. There is no water up there, right? For between us and the lowest heaven, there exists no body except the elements, and there is no water above the air, right? This judgment, it doesn't matter to you and I right now if there actually is water in space or not. Completely irrelevant. The point is that the Rambam, according to his science, understood there was no water up there, right? So this judgment applies all the more if someone imagines that this firmament and what is above it are above the heaven. Then it's even more of a problem if you make the firmament in a different place than Rambam made it in the last paragraph. In that case, the thing would be even more impossible and remote from apprehension. If you assume the firmament means something else, like the highest, most sphere, there's certainly no water up there. However, if, on the other hand, the matter is considered according to its inner meaning and to what was truly intended, it is most hidden, right? Right. In other words, it's not truly talking about water. It's not even meant to speak in its simple meaning of the words. And this is the key here. And this is why it's relevant today. When we read the words, it's not even meant to be talking about the simple meaning of the words. Every single thing that it says here, it doesn't mean the simple meaning. It means something deeper, right? And that is most hidden, right? What is it that its meaning is I don't know. I don't know. And Rambam is not really even going to tell us. Something different up there, right? For in that case, it was necessary for it to be one of the concealed secrets so that the vulgar should not know it. Right? For whatever reason, we don't know what's up there, because if people would know, then they would make a mistake. We're going to see soon a pattern that the reason why we're worried about this mistake is because if you still need to know the page, it's 353 now. I'm all the way at the bottom of 353. Why are we so worried about vulgar people knowing things, right? And it's going to be apparent that at least one of the main things that the Rambam is worried about is because if I explain it to you based on this Aristotelian physics, right, and I explain you some whole principle and it sounds really good and it seems to make sense in the verse, and then somebody comes tomorrow and proves that I have the physics wrong, which we know happened historically, then the vulgar people will think that the whole thing is a farce, because they won't understand that knowledge progresses. They won't understand that. They won't understand that I'm just trying to make an attempt at the meaning. So we couldn't say the meaning. That's one of the reasons why. There's others, but that's one of the main ones which will come out. Why the Torah didn't reveal those secrets? Because the Torah, if you think about when the Torah was given, the Torah wasn't going to tell you Einsteinian physics or quantum mechanics or wherever physics is up to now. So how then could it be proper to say of such a matter that it was good? So since it's talking about something that's up there that we don't know about, that we don't see, that we can't define, so it can't say it's good, right? For the meaning of the words that it was good, what does it mean when you say something is good? that the thing in question is of externally visible and a manifest utility for the existence and permanence of that which exists. The Rambam, of course, has a earth-centric view of everything, right? We down here, what we see and we know how to use, and we make sense to us, and we see it, we feel it. You can call that good, right? The stuff up there, it has some kind of a purpose towards us down here, but we don't know it, we don't understand it, we don't see it, we don't feel it. Therefore, you can't call it good. But in a matter whose meaning is hidden and it's understood in its external meaning, does not exist in such a way as to appear useful, right? What utility, right, externally visible to the people at large could there be, so that the words that it was good could be said with reference to it? When God is giving the Torah to people, he can't tell you that that's good, because I don't even know what's up there, right? So I cannot help adding you the following explanation. I'm going to add the following, and that is, here, if you don't mind, I'm going to switch for a second just to read it in the Hebrew, because it's a little better translation. The English translation of this few lines, I just didn't like it. So the Hebrew translation, right? Beor, right? And I'm forced here to add another addition. Right? That this thing, right? Even though this thing that's up there in space, even though it is a very large and important part of actual things that exist, of existence, right? It's not, its goal is not a purposeful goal to continue existence in order that it should be said that it's good. The reason why this was done was in order to remove that stuff, that heavenly stuff, from the world that we see it, in order that this world should function. So there was some other material that needed to be removed from this earth in order to make the earth work. Whatever that, maybe it's radioactivity or something. I'm just throwing a modern thing. It needed to be removed from the earth and placed in space. Like we now know, I know I'm completely stepping out on a limb here. We now know that the atmosphere protects us from the sun's radiation. Otherwise, we'd all die of radiation sickness in 5 seconds flat, right? So that atmosphere, maybe that's the rakia, right, which divides us, and it took out that stuff that was necessary to remove in order for Earth to be habitable. And again, I'm saying that with the full awareness that in 10 years or 100 years or 1,000 years, somebody might disprove that. The point being is exactly that you don't interpret the Bereshis literally. And now it's open. You and I can all speculate as to what it means. And one day, when all of science is figured out, one day, when everything is all figured out, we will then know what it all is talking about. Anyway, among the things you ought to know, I'm back in page 354 on the second paragraph. It starts with the word among. Another thing you need to know about is that the Chazal, the sages, have made it clear that God only made grass and trees grow from the earth after he caused rain to fall upon them. So there was no plants until it rained. And that it's saying, and there went up a mist from the earth and so on, is a description of the first state of matters, right? A mist came out, like some kind of a mist came out of the earth. That was before the command of let the earth put forth grass, right? So this is, if you look in the next day, right? Because Rambam just gave us a whole speech about the second day. Now he's talking about the third day. So it says Tache Aretz Desha, right? So and the Eid Yalam and Aretz from before is before that. For this reason, Onkelos translates there gone up a mist from the earth. This is also clear from the text itself, because it says, and no shrub of the field was yet on the earth, right? In the next parak, it says that if you look in chapter 2, verse 5, it says, "B'chol siach hasod terem yeh ba'aretz," right? And then it rained, and then the plants came out. So this is clear by now. So Rambam doesn't really go into detail here. He just says you should know about it, right? Think about it, and that's it. Because Rambam is telling us things like what does this all mean? What's the purpose? What's the point? Think about it, right? Because we're engaged in speculation. You who are engaged in speculation know that after the forces of the sphere, the first of the causes producing generation and passing away are light and darkness. Now the forces of the sphere are the force that makes the spheres move around. Those spheres that move around cause all the things that happen below it to happen. That's like the energy that like mixes up everything in the world and makes things happen, right? Makes it different things come into being and different things end their existence, right? But the first thing that comes is light and darkness, because heat and cold are consequent upon them. So the forces of light and darkness are constantly fighting with each other in the forms of light and dark, or cold and hot, right? And they intermix, the elements intermix in consequence of the motion of the sphere. The elements, meaning the four elements, earth, wind, water, fire, mix because they're being stirred up by the motion of the sphere. And because of the different combinations of light and dark, though, as they mix, they take different forms. I like to think of this light and dark as another term for energy. The first combination that is produced by them is constituted by two exhalations, or shnei ha'edim, or two mists, which are the first causes of all meteorological phenomena, among which rain figures. Everything that happens in the weather happens because of this mixing, and the mixing of this is all Aristotelian physics stuff. There are also the causes of the minerals, and after them the composition of the plants and the living beings, and finally the composition being that of man. Darkness is the nature of the existence of the whole lower world, right? So the whole lower world is in a state of darkness, but light comes and pushes the darkness away. If there's no light, then darkness is the bottom line. Darkness is the static state. It should be sufficient for you to know that when there is no light, the state of matters remains permanent. If you don't bring light, and the way I'm thinking of it, if you don't put in energy, if you don't have sunlight, everything dies. Everything just stays exactly the same. The scriptural text about the account of beginning goes exactly in this order, leaving out nothing. So that's why light had to be first, right? Remember, the first day is Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or, let there be light. That was the first thing, because without light, none of this creation could occur. So again, that corresponds, according to Rambam, to his understanding of Aristotelian physics, as he just explained to us, the way that the sphere causes the things that are beneath the sphere to happen, according to the laws of science. Among the things that you ought to know, another thing you ought to think about is, and this is a really nice little paragraph here, is they're saying, is another saying of Chazal, where Chazal say in Maseches Rosh Hashanah, all the works of the beginning, in other words, all of Maaseh Bereshis, were created according to their perfect stature, perfect reason, perfect beauty, and litzivionam. Litzivionam would be according to their beauty, right? He means, right, when Chazal say, when the rabbi says this, he means that everything that was created according to the perfection of quantity, the perfection of form, and with the most beautiful accidents. And I like to switch the term accidents for qualities. You know, I've been doing that so far, and it's worked pretty well. It's a better word than the word accidents in modern English. This is expressed in the word litzivionam, which derives from the word tzivi, right, which is used as the pasuk that says that the land of Israel is Eretz Tzivi, a most beautiful land. Know this, too, for it is a great principle which has been established as true and has become clear. So, so when the Maaseh Bereshis were created, they were created with perfection, and perfection brings beauty. Think about it. And he leaves it at that. Think about that, and think about that as you read through Maaseh Bereshis. Among the things which you ought to reflect carefully is the fact that it mentions the creation of man in the 6 days of the beginning. And it says, male and female, he created them. So this again is in verse 27, right? And it says, Zachar unekeva bara osam, right? Male and female, he made them. He created them. So it then concludes its account of creation and talks about, and the heaven and the earth were finished, and all the hosts of them. So that's okay. So, I'm sorry, right? The beginning of Kiddush on Friday night. So then it makes a new start regarding the creation of Eve from Adam. It discusses how Eve came from Adam, and it mentions the tree of life, the Eitz HaChaim, and the tree of knowledge, the Eitz HaDas, and the tail of the serpent, and all that story. And it makes out all this happened after Adam had been placed in the Garden of Eden. Now, all the sages, may their memory be blessed, are unanimous in thinking that all this story occurred on Friday, and nothing was changed in any respect after the 6 days of the beginning. So all this stuff, right, was part of the creation process. And the end of the creation process, so in other words, when human beings were kicked out of Gan Eden and sent into the world, that was that was the end of the time of creation and the beginning of the world, right? So all of this would happen during the process of creation. There's something to think about. Rambam's not going to go into it in depth at all. He's purposely throwing out all these things and telling us to think about them. All right. Now, all the sages made it. Okay, I just read that. For this reason, none of the things should be judged incongruous. So if you read stuff in there which doesn't seem to make scientific sense, don't worry about it. Because up until then, no permanently established nature had come about. The laws of nature weren't yet established. It was still during the time of creation. Remember, Rambam is of the opinion that the laws of nature were created when nature was created. Before then, there were no laws. With all, they have mentioned things that I will let you hear, having gleaned them in their various places, and I shall give you pointers to certain things, just as they, may their memory be blessed, have given us pointers. So I'm going to mention a few things here, just like Chazal mentioned a few things there. And he makes an interesting statement about Chazal, which gives us another hint how to interpret things that the rabbis say that might be difficult. Know that those things that I shall mention to you from the dicta of the sages are sayings that are of the utmost perfection. When they say these things, they make a lot of sense. They're great. Their allegorical interpretation was clear to those to whom they were addressed, and they are unambiguous. So even though they might sound really weird to us, when they were speaking to the people in their audience, it made a lot of sense. Think about the power of those words. That's like when the Chazal were saying the messages. This is a very important thing to remember. Chazal had an audience, and the audience was sitting in front of them in the Beis Medrash, right? And they were teaching them. They understood the references, and they understood what was meant by that. Now, you can understand this on many different levels, but the simplest and most obvious level is that sometimes these things might not make so much sense to us. They don't jive with modern science, or they don't work with the way we think of things. But that's okay, because that it's like if you'd go to a rabbi's sermon and you'd somehow get into a time machine and plunk yourself into a shul in 1922, and you'd sit there and listen to a sermon, and it just goes right over your head. I mean, you might understand the language if you go to a shul that speaks whatever language you're speaking, but it goes right out because the references he uses, they're just not talking to you. So to say, if you wind back 2,000 years, sometimes Chazal, they're talking to the audience that is in front of them, and you have to remember that. That doesn't mean we can't learn lessons from them. Of course we can, and of course we should, but we need to keep that in mind, right? Hence, I will not go too far in interpreting them, and I will not set forth their meaning at length, right? For I will, and it's so the real messages aren't in necessarily the words and the statements that they make, but they are in the meaning that's behind them. And I will not be the one who divulges a secret. I'm not going to be the one that tells you, right? They said something to the people that were in front of them who understood what the deeper meaning was. We look at the surface meaning and it makes no sense to us, and we don't necessarily get the deeper meaning. And I'm not necessarily going to tell you the deeper meaning. However, it will suffice for someone like you if I mention them in a certain order and by means of slight indications. I'll give you little hints, and then you could think on your own, based on now that you're understanding, you could start thinking on your own of what they meant. One of these dictas, they're saying that Adam and Eve were created together. One of the statements of Chazal. So Rambam started talking a lot before about psukim, about verses. Now he's talking about famous words from the Chazal, from the rabbis. So one of them is when they said that Adam and Eve were created together, having their backs joined. So they were one being. There was a male/female. That was one creature. And that this being was divided, and one half of it was taken and brought to Adam. So the expression one of his ribs means one of his sides, like a side of the tabernacle. According to this, I just turned the page to 356. They say that his when it says the word tzela, it doesn't mean his rib, but it means his side. Understand in what way it has been explained that they were two in a certain respect, and that they were also one. They were etzem me'atzamai, right? Ubasam mibisari, right? So, which is how Adam talked about her. So they're in one sense they're the same, in another sense they're different. This has received additional confirmation through the fact that one is called Ish and the other one's called Isha. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit here just to save time. It also confirms their union, and he shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one. So you see again the joining together, the separating apart, the similarities and the differences, and so on. The name is almost the same, but a little bit different. How great is the ignorance of him who does not understand that all this is necessary with a view to a certain notion. In other words, that Chazal weren't explaining to us the biological process of how men and women were created. And if you think that, then you're one of those vulgar, right? Chazal were trying to teach us a certain notion, a certain idea of the similarities between men and women, the things that bring them together, and the differences between the two. The place where they have different constitutions, different roles, etc. I know nowadays, if I say that, people might jump on me, but I'll say it anyway. At least that's what the Rambam is saying. This then has become clear, right? So I'm showing you, think about the notion underneath what Chazal are saying. Don't think about a creature that's half male, half female, facing the other way, like the push me, pull you animal from Dr. Doolittle. Each one going. Just don't think about such images. That's not what Chazal mean. Don't stop thinking like that. That's what Rambam is trying to tell us. You're going to ask silly questions. Forget the silly questions and think about the notion, the idea of the similarities and the differences, etc. And I just hinted it to you. Rambam is going to bring us a few more of these things. And in some cases, his hints are going to be even less hints. And you're really going to have to think on your own. Among the things you ought to know is the following explanation, which they give in the Medrash. They explain that the serpent had a rider, that the snake had a guy riding on the snake, right? And the snake was the size of a camel, and it was the rider who was talking to Chava. And the rider was a guy, an angel, a bad angel named Samael, right? And they say that the Samael is the same thing as Satan. And you find also passages, and Rambam is going to give you a hint. Who is Satan? What's Satan? What's that? Rambam in a few places, and I think we mentioned this way back in the beginning a little bit. Rambam doesn't view Satan as like an angel. So Rambam views Satan as the human inclination to do evil. We get mad, we do bad things. We have lust, we make big mistakes and do bad things. We have jealousy, we do bad things. There's lots of things that drive us to do bad stuff. All that is all encompassed, right, in Satan. Every evil force in the world, the force that brings about illness and suffering, and that, it's all Satan, right? It's referring to natural processes, right? So, and Avram Avinu, and therefore Rambam is telling us Samael, right? The reason why it tells us that the Chazal associate this with Satan, is then he's going to remind us a couple other places. It talks about how Satan tried to tempt Avram Avinu not to offer Yitzchak as a sacrifice. He wanted to tempt Yitzchak not to listen to his father. And with reference to the story, to the binding of Isaac, they say Samael came to him and said, "What? Have you lost your senses?" and so on. It's the inclination to do the wrong thing under the search situation. Thus it has become clear to you that Samael is Satan. It's the same thing. Is Satan or Satan or Satan, however you want to pronounce it. This name is used with a view to a certain signification, just as the name Nachash is used with a certain signification. So the Nachash, don't imagine an actual snake. Don't imagine an actual evil guy with horns and a pitchfork and a tail that's all red and breathing fire, right? But just think of it, it's trying to teach you some idea, and then think about what the idea is. When they speak of it's coming to deceive Eve, to deceive Chava, they say Samael was riding, and the Holy One, blessed be He, was laughing at both the camel and its rider. So think about it. Among the things you ought to know and have your attention aroused to is the fact that this next thing, the Rambam is not even going to give us any hints. I gave you some hints as to what, by bringing the story of Avram, the Rambam gave us a few hints as to what Chazal were trying to teach us when they brought in these evil figures. So we should start imagining like, a Disney movie with monster coming in, right? But now this next one, Rambam is not even going to give us enough of a hint, but he's going to tell us you have to think of it in the same way. Among the things you ought to know and have your attention aroused to is the fact that the Nachash didn't talk to Adam at all. The conversation only took place between the snake, the serpent, and Chava, right? It was through the intermediation of Eve, Adam was harmed through Chava. So the Nachash destroyed him by working through his wife, right? Extreme enmity only comes about only comes to be realized between the Nachash and Chava, and the pasuk says, and its seed and hers, the descendants of Eve and the descendants of the snake, right? On the other hand, her seed, when it says the descendants of Eve, right? Clearly, that is indubitably the seed of Adam, right? Her children are obviously the children of Adam, right? So, but it still calls it her children. So the enmity is between those that come from her. Remember, she's the one that talked to the snake, right? And those that come from the snake. So even more strange is that, so think about it. I'm not here to tell you what to think, but think about that idea the Rambam is telling us, right? Even more strange is the tie between the serpent and Eve. I mean, its seed and hers, a tie that is in the head and the heel, right? You know, so also paraphrasing the Psukim and Bereshis, she being victorious through the head and through the heel. This is also clear. In other words, what does that mean? It's clear. What does that mean? It's clear that it's not literal. What is the head? What is the heel? Think about that and think about what it means. Again, it's not literal, but there are ideas. There are lessons to be learned that are beneath these words and these ideas. Among the amazing dicta whose external meaning is exceedingly incongruous, another place where we have another example where the literal easy translation of the words completely makes no sense whatsoever, which is another obvious proof that there's a deeper meaning that's the real meaning, is when you obtain a true understanding of the, but in which, when you obtain a true understanding of the chapters of the treatise, in other words, when you finish this book, you'll understand how to know this, but not today. You're not going to know it now. But when you obtain a true understanding, then you can come back to this really weird verse, right? And I'm sorry, this really, really weird Mamar Chazal, right? And then you can start trying to understand it. Rambam is teasing us here because we don't know what exactly is the meaning of it. It's a Chazal that has been quoted several times, and it sounds awfully like Lahabdil, the Christian doctrine of original sin somehow. Or it could also is sometimes used to justify some sort of a spiritual ontological difference between Jews and Gentiles, because you'll see what I mean in a minute. But Rambam is not telling us this at all. The Rambam is telling us that it sounds really weird and you should think about it. So the Chazal say that when the serpent came to Eve, meaning the Chazal understood that the Nachash and Chava had intercourse, had sexual relations, it cast pollution into her. And Chava didn't become pregnant necessarily, but he ejaculated into her pollution, bad stuff. And the pollution of the sons of Israel, and that pollution was passed from Chava to all of her descendants, to all humans. However, at the people present at Sinai, it came to an end. So as for the pollution of the nations who had not been present, their pollution has not come to an end. This has come to be an understanding of some that want to make an ontological difference between Jews and non-Jews, use this as a source. The Rambam's not saying that at all. He's saying that this is an extremely incongruous, right? Now, it makes no sense if you look at it on its surface. There must be a deeper meaning. And this too, you should follow up in your thought. Think about it. Just like you're thinking about all the other stuff I told you to think about this. Because it's weird, very weird. But you need to read the whole book, and you really have to absorb the principles and ideas I'm trying to teach you, Rambam says, and then you might come up with an understanding. Among the things you ought to know, another thing, which also doesn't make sense, another thing that Chazal say, when they talk about the size of the tree of life, they say it takes 500 years to walk the bulk of the tree. And all of the waters of the beginning spring up from beneath, and all the waters of the world come from beneath that tree. They make it clear that this measure is applied to the thickness of its body and not the dimension of its buffs. They say the object of this saying is not its body, but its trunk. And the interpretation of its trunk is the thickness of its upright timber. They added a supplementary remark in order to complete the explanation and exposition of the meaning. This then is clear. And when Rambam says it's clear, what he means is it's clear that it's not meant to be literal. Like what is this? This 500-year walk to get around the tree? Like what? This is just crazy stuff, right? But that's the point. Think about it, and you'll find the meaning. Among another thing that Chazal say, as for the tree of knowledge, the Holy One, blessed be, has never revealed that tree to man and will never reveal it. And this is fascinating. This is correct in as much as the nature of what exists require it. Meaning, right? It's impossible according to the laws of nature for such a tree to actually exist. So what it says when it says that God never revealed it, it's because it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, at least not in the real world that you and I live in, right? At some spiritual level or whatever, who knows, or on some idea level of what it's trying to teach us. You can think about, if anyone has any ideas, I'm certainly open to listen to what ideas you might have. But the bottom line is that the Holy One never revealed it and will never reveal it because it can't exist in this world which runs by the laws of nature. Among the things you ought to know, another thing that Chazal say that's weird, but you should think about. And the Lord took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden and gave him rest. Thus, they do not make out that this text means that he took him away from one place and put him in another. Right? It doesn't mean that he took him from America and plunked him in Europe, right? But rather it means he raised the rank of existence from among the existence. So here Rambam was giving a hint as to what this verse means, that comes into being and passed away and established him in a certain state. That God took the human being and put him in a certain state of existence. Another thing, and have your attention aroused to, is the manifestation of wisdom. I would like to really I'm trying to finish this chapter today. Because the two children of Adam called Cain and Hevel, or Cain and Abel, right? And both of them ended up not perishing, but eventually only Seth was the forefather of the remainder, right? Because Cain and all of his children ended up being killed in the flood. So this has already been shown to be correct. Exactly what he means is not 100% clear. But again, think about it. What's the point? That he had these two sons. Neither of them ended up being the forefathers of humanity. What's the deal? What's going on? Think about it. Among other things you ought to think and have your attention aroused to is, and the man gave names. This is an interesting point here. So it informs us that languages are conventional and not natural. So there was a debate back then as to whether or not language is a consequence of a culture and a climate in which a people live, which causes them to develop a certain language, or do people just sit down and decide, I'm going to call this a microphone, this a book, this a laptop, etc. So Rambam is saying when it says that man decided the names of the animals, that's a proof that it's conventional. People sat down and decided this is going to be a cat, this is going to be a dog, this is going to be a cow, etc., right? It's not clear because Rambam in some other places, namely in his book of Refuah, in his book on medicine, he actually quotes Galen, who was a Roman philosopher, physician, who actually believed that it was the opposite, that it wasn't natural, that it's natural as opposed to conventional, but whatever. Rambam over here is saying that maybe he changed his mind, maybe he had two different opinions, who knows. Anyway, fine. We're going to finish with this last paragraph, and we'll finish his analysis of Bereshis. But remember, he left tons and tons of things for us to think about. And he promised us that if we really absorb the principles and ideas of Moreh Nevuchim, we can look at those psukim and try to understand them. And I think that forgive if this sounds a little bit arrogant, but I do believe that what Rambam is doing is he's giving us permission to do the same thing that he did. Just like he took Aristotelian physics and applied it to the verses and showed how it makes sense, that gives us permission to take the knowledge that we have of the world and apply it to the Torah and suggest, just like he suggested, that this might be what it means. Okay? As long as we have the humility to recognize that we also might be wrong, it's totally safe and okay to understand Bereshis that way and not understand it literally. And he has made it clear repeatedly over and over and over again that it's not to be taken literally and that it would be dangerous to take it literally. And I know I say that a million times because I still hear from people telling me that the Rambam never said that Bereshis isn't literal, but it's just patently ridiculous to say something like that. But anyway, let's go on. Among the things you ought to reflect upon are the 4 words that occur with reference to the relation between heaven and God. I'm going to go to the Hebrew here. It's just better. So forgive me, I'm just going to read to the end of the chapter in the Hebrew from the Rav Kapach Hebrew translation. The four terms, Vehem, bara, v'asa, v'kana, ve'el, right? The idea of bara, which is to create, asa is to do or to make, v'kana is to acquire, and el is a word that usually refers to God. Omar, bara Elokim et hashemayim ba'aretz. It says God created the heaven and the earth. Biyom asos Hashem Elokim eretz hashemayim, the day that he made it. Kon hashemayim ba'aretz, he's the acquirer, or the owner, or V'yomer El Olam, he is the God of the universe. V'yomer Elohei Hashemayim Elohei Aretz. Aval Amru, and when it says in the other verses, Asher Konanta, that you established, or V'tipcha Hashemayim, V'nota Hashemayim, God spreads the heavens, or shades the heavens, or tilts the heavens. Kol Elu Kulam Asa. Those are all part and parcel of the same term Asa, to make. However, Avaloshan Yitzira Lo Nemar. Now, you and I, when we think in Hebrew, many of us, if you're familiar with Hebrew, if I asked you how to say create, you might say bara, but you're probably, the first word that comes to your mind is yotzar, right? Because yotzar is often, right, is to create, to make something. Now, in Bereshis, it doesn't use the language yotzar. Why? So Rambam is about to explain that. Kinirali, she'ena yitzira ne'emeres ela hal tavnitz v'atior, right? Yitzira is referring to create something out of the things that already exist, right? So you take something and you give it form, you give it shape, you give it a function, right? So you take wood and you make a table, you take different pieces of metal and you make a machine, right? Oh, af mikra mesha mikra, you give it a certain quality, you paint it blue, you paint it green, you sand it and you make it smooth, you bang it and you make it rough, or things like that. The form and the shape of things are also attributes of the thing. When it says that God creates light, this is not referring to the borei ar, but this is referring to the fashioning of light. Meaning, remember Rambam said before, a few paragraphs ago, that the way the light, and I interpreted that as energy, but Rambam is saying the light mixes in different levels in different parts of the world. That's what gives the energy for things to change and become stuff, right? When it also says God creates the mountains. Now the mountains are just earth and rock, like everything else, right? So God takes earth, which is an already existent thing, and he gives it a form as a mountain. So that's not Yitzira Yesh Me'ayin, something from nothing. That is creation, meaning taking something that exists and giving it a certain form. But when we're talking about creating the heavens and the earth, meaning creating something out of nothing, that the word bara, that's the word create, which is bara. It's something from nothing, ex nihilo, creation, right? That's when we use the term bara. So Rambam is telling us the difference between the Hebrew term bara and the Hebrew term yatzar. Right? When it says it makes something according to their forms, tsuro sehen is the same root as the word yitzira, letzuros, right? What it means is haminios, the different species that he gave to ehen, their natures, their differences. And it also, so that's the difference between bara and yotzar. Now it uses the term kana, he owns, because to connote a different aspect of the creation. Bara is referring to yesh me'ayin, ex nihilo, creation. Kana is referring to the bnei shuyis ala moshel alein. He rules over them, kimishol ha'adon alabadav, like a master over his servants. L'vigach nichra adon kol haaretz, v'ha adon. In order to be a master, you have to acquire, you have to own, right? But then no till it's so therefore it uses the word kana. Now, since when I start talking about acquiring something, it makes us think that maybe he's talking about kadmos. He's talking about the Aristotelian idea that the world always existed and all God did was bought it from somebody. God went to the universe exchange and bought the universe on the heavenly universe exchange. But no, that's not what it means. Therefore it reminds us, right? That's why it keeps on using those terms of bara biasa. So it has to use the word kona because he owns it, because he's a master. But it keeps reminding us that he's the creator in something from nothing. Aval Elohei Hashemayim, when it talks about the gods or El Olam Hu Mechinas Shlemusa, that's a different term. That's referring to God's completeness, His wholeness, His perfectness. Right? Harayu Elohim, Kolomar Shofet Vehem Nishpatim, V'lo Be'inyan Meshila. It's not so much uh, 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 a ruler like a governor, but rather a ruler like a judge. Kizehu inyan kona, right? That because that idea of being a ruler is referenced by the other term kona. Elohim, so rather when it talks about Elohim, remember the word Elohim often means not a god, but it means a judge or a court, right? So that's referring to God's hashpasi salavim and siyas hashpasam harehu Elohav Elohim. He's the judge and not them. Kolomar hashemayim, right? Meaning the heavens themselves are not, but God is. Dazos, know this. Everything that I said there, this is enough. I've said enough to fulfill the goal of this book, right? And according, for the one who is studying this book. So, if you study this book, you read this book, you understand what I'm trying to teach you, you can go back and think about all of those things that I just taught you. So that concludes Rambam's analysis of Genesis. I wanted to know from you guys if anyone has what do you think about this analysis of Genesis, and does it help, hurt, or I just want to hear what anyone has any thoughts.
Very interesting.
Thank you. That's good. I find it interesting too. It's pretty cool. Any other comments? Any ideas as to why? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just had a question about I appreciate the distinction he made between creation from nothing, creation ex nihilo, and just simply reforming matter that already exists into something else.
Right.
I was a little bit confused at the outset when you the discussion when the subject was I guess it was the waters below and the waters above,
right?
And the firmament is in between. Could this have been, I don't know, some sort of from the point of view of somebody from 2000 BCE looking at the world, I mean, looking at the sky and looking at rain clouds, those seem to be waters above, and the firmament in between, and then waters below would be the oceans or the rivers or the lakes. Am I way off base? And
well, I don't think you're way off base, because I have seen people understand it that way. So it's not way off base. I have seen people understand. I've seen, some secular and Christian and maybe even Jewish things here and there that understand the above waters, meaning the waters that are the rain, and the below waters. But Rambam, it doesn't consider that as a possibility. The Rambam understood already, and we know this, that he understood. I mean, they didn't fully grasp the cycle of water like we do, but they understood already that water moisture rises and falls and condenses, and they understood that the firmament. The Rambam understood himself the firmament to be referring to the sphere within which the moon rotates, because that's the closest sphere to Earth. So everything beneath the sphere of the moon, that's this firmament according to Rambam. And then the Rambam allows for the other possible opinion that maybe the firmament means the outermost sphere, which is the one within which the farthest stars that we see rotate within the outermost sphere, above which in Aristotelian physics the universe ends, right? So that's how Rambam understood the firmament. But there are people that understood it the way you said it, and it's not invalid. It's not wrong to say that. It's just it wouldn't have been the way the Rambam explains it, because it wouldn't have fit with his science. The best one for him, for his science, was that because the Rambam already said that once you go above the moon, we got the moon and the rotation of the moon down pat, right? That makes sense. We have it all figured out, how it goes around, and that once you get above that, none of it makes sense, at least according to Rambam, because the motions don't work, nothing works, it's all a big fat mess, right?
Okay.
So the same thing, the water that's above that is some stuff that I don't know what it is, some different kind of substance, something.
But I guess the question comes to mind, what did he, how did the waters above tie into the moon or tie into, or that's what occurs to me. I mean,
Yeah, well, it's above the sphere of the moon. So
above the
whatever that means, the waters that are above there, the Rambam compared that to the stone, the marble stone that Rabbi Akiva saw, that he said you can't call it water, right? I mean, it's something that we don't know, that we can't comprehend, because we don't have any way of measuring what goes on that high, right? We don't have a way of sensing it, measuring it, seeing it. So the Rambam felt that the nature of what happens up there is just different. It just follows different physical laws, which we don't have a grasp on. I mean, and now we've figured out that it follows the same physical laws that are down here. We just have a better grasp on it. But the Rambam didn't have that grasp, and neither did anyone in those days. They were all struggling to try to figure it out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? As if there aren't, we could next week we're going to learn a little bit about the reason of the mitzvah of Shabbat, which should be really fun. It's a quick chapter 31, and then we're going to start getting to prophecy, which is going to be really cool, and we have a lot of cool stuff coming up. So we have a lot to learn. So everyone, thank you very much for joining, and have a wonderful evening.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye.